we've got Richard on the line here. Hey, Richard, you are live on the line with Promise and Paul. How are you today?
I am phenomenal. Number one, Paul Lynn's huge fan. Promise, what I've heard from you sounds fantastic. I will be very prompt. Yeah,
what was that?
I will attempt to be as prompt as possible.
Very good.
All good.
So, as simply as possible, I believe that it is consequently very wise to believe in God, at least some vague deist perspective, if only because I think there are great arguments for mind-body dualism, and I think that, generally speaking, the universe has a great amount of, like, say Spinoza's God, for example, there's a great amount of ways that you can look at the universe where you find a lot of orderliness that would be atypical of what you would think of like a universe that was made by non-divine methods. Does that make any sense?
Not quite, because yeah, go ahead, Paul.
Well, I just wanted to make sure, to be clear, you're advocating that it's true, not that it's has utility, right? Because I'm not as interested in the utility arguments. You're arguing that it is true. Not just
when I was originally asked to give a reason to believe, I was originally told that I was supposed to, I asked to say it is wise to believe in God. That was what I originally posited.
I mean,
still will
Promise might be interested in the utility. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm more concerned if you think it's true or not. Do you think it's true? Do you think a God exists?
I do think that a God exists. Yes. In fact, I kind of think three do. I am Roman Catholic.
Okay, cool. I'd love to hear why you think those gods exist.
Well, I was just being coy. It is only one God. But even so, the reason why I personally am convinced by God is because I find the idea of, church tradition being passed down and offering these innumerable, pretty reasonable testimonies about Jesus and his teachings to be more plausible than the idea that he was a fiction of some kind.
Do you think those are the only two choices?
I would imagine that there's only two choices, one that he is God, one that he is not. I can't imagine how there's anything besides the binary.
Oh, okay, but that's not how you framed it, right? You framed it as all the testimonies are true or he was a fictional person. That was the dichotomy.
I guess I was just trying to... I didn't mean to set up the dichotomy as though it is either that everything is true or nothing is true. I mean, there are certainly... I've watched a lot of your videos about how some testimonies are particularly dubious, especially regarding the apostles and their martyrdom.
Excellent. Well, I'm glad you've listened. Do you think that? Would you agree that? Sorry, it sounds like you're saying that testimony is the major reason that you believe. Before we go down that path, is that an accurate statement?
I would say testimony and also church tradition. And I understand that this might not necessarily. This is bordering on an argument from authority, but I do believe there is some level of grandiosity, some reverence that you should hold to the fact that this existed so long.
Do you think that there's a distinction, a meaningful distinction between testimony and church tradition?
Well, yes. I would imagine that there was plenty of testimonies that certainly are not verified by church tradition.
Let me ask this. Do you think that church tradition is a subset of testimony?
I think that there are testimonies that are only around because of church tradition. I think that there are testimonies that are also around that are in spite of church tradition.
Is church tradition, is its own separate entity. Anything other than testimony?
Yeah. I mean, if you take, like, say, for example, Our Lady of Guadalupe or things of that nature, which I guess the church tradition for those are just that they're historicity of supernatural events pertaining to them, as opposed to them being specifically.
Okay. Do you object to me? Do you object to me lumping those two things together? I see no meaningful distinction between what you're calling church tradition and testimony, because to me, the church tradition is literally just testimony.
Testimony in the sense that it is a group of human beings espousing information over the course of generations?
Yes.
Okay. If that's how you understand testimony, then sure. I was referring to testimony as being specifically a person's quoted line.
Oh, well, that's eyewitness testimony. That would be, that's also a subset of testimony, but we can stick with that.
Understood. Okay. Well, in that case, I would say eyewitness testimony is distinct from church tradition.
Okay. Fair enough. I would agree with you on that. When someone makes a testimonial claim, would you agree that some percentage of testimony are people lying? Just in general, not in terms of the church,
absolutely.
just in general. Okay. So some non-0% of people are lying. And would you agree that there's some non-0% of people who are sincerely mistaken about what they're saying? So they're saying what they truly believe, but it's not, in fact, accurate.
Yeah, I do think that as well.
Okay. And then there would be a third category of potentially there are some people who are giving me supernatural claims, and I'm talking specifically with supernatural here, supernatural claims that are valid and real. And if I lived in your universe, there would be some percentage of people who are giving testimony about a valid, real, supernatural thing. So there's at least three categories of testimony, right?
Sure.
Even in your world, if you had to put those in a pie chart, would I assume the slivers of pie would be largest for people who are lying and people who are mistaken versus the people who are genuinely describing a real veridical miracle.
Now, were you in my universe, I would think that the one for lying would be smaller than the one for the people who are genuinely mistaken.
So,
but
sorry, I phrased that poorly. Well said. I more meant to say that those two, however you might organize those two, that whatever size of pie those are, they're both at least larger than the ones who are giving true stories of real miracles.
Sure. And I mean, I would obviously have no way to immediately verify those because it's not like you can scientifically test a miracle.
Okay. So then why do you base your convictions upon testimony when that is the smallest piece of the pie?
Well, because, okay, so I will take your question and I will yoink it and twist it only slightly in order to make it fit more with my universe as you were describing it before. I hold reverence generally to church tradition because I particularly think that it is useful, which is something you didn't want to talk about. Not that you didn't want to talk about it, just that it wasn't something you were particularly willing to engage in because it's not the topic that you were interested in. I didn't mean to imply that you were like disinterested in the idea that religion is useful.
Fair enough. And I understand that's my own proclivity, so carry on.
Well, and for me, I'm going to double down on that and say for me, whether something is useful or not doesn't explain if it's true or not. So that's why I want to stay away from that side of the conversation.
Okay, I find that interesting, though. Like, you would probably agree. I mean, this is maybe just a question of definitions of what you believe reality is, but you would probably agree that, like, mathematics are real.
Well,
are real in what sense?
Yeah.
Exactly. This is where we're getting into, like, a specific definition fight that I don't necessarily want to get into. But, like, the idea that the concept can exist because it is pragmatically useful isn't necessarily unreasonable.
Well, I would never deduce that something's real because math says it's real. Like, that's weird.
No, I meant to say that, like, the concept of math in general, like the disambiguation of mathematics as a tool for humanity to use in order to help discuss the universe.
But that's not that's a tool, not an entity. So if you're telling me that an entity, that a God exists, that's very different than claiming that mathematics are useful. Those are not a good comparison.
I don't necessarily think that it's helpful to view God as an entity in particular. I mean, after all, if you believe in church doctrine, then you wouldn't even believe that it is an individual entity.
So maybe we need you to define exactly what a God is. And I don't want to steer away from where Paul was going with this because I think he had a question there.
No, sure. And I will get that.
I'm sorry.
I did not forget that Paul was specifically asking me. Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you. There's a little bit of delay on my side of the line. Am I okay to go?
Go ahead. Yep.
Thank you so much. So just to get out of the definition fight, I understand an entity to be something that exists within the universe. That's the reason why I was originally saying that it wasn't necessarily helpful to describe God that way. Now, to get back to Paul's question, which is specifically why do I base my reality, my universe off of testimony? Well, I don't base it off of any old testimony. I base it off of church tradition and eyewitness testimony. And I believe that those are significantly higher in the pie chart of being likely to be based off of reality, people who are earnestly not mistaken, than any other alternative.
Hold on. Why you think that the pie chart is different for eyewitness testimony?
I think the pie chart is different for religious Christian testimony.
So you're special pleading this?
This isn't a special pleading as much as I understand where you're coming from, but this is me talking about the fact that this is something that was, as far as I'm aware, testable at the time.
Well, how?
I mean, you are aware as well as I am. Hold on, actually, Jesus was a real historical person.
Yeah, I'm gonna retract that question because you threw for a sec. What? Sorry, I got flustered there. Carry on with what you're saying. I'm. It doesn't seem like.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Promise. Save me here.
How do you know that?
Okay, so if we're going to get into the question of what I can know versus not, then we're going to get into another definition fight. I believe it's more useful to talk about what I can pragmatically trust. Because none of you can know anything either, as far as I'm aware.
Are you saying that you think a God claim is unfalsifiable?
I mean, if you go off of a certain definition, everything is unjustifiable. Unjustifiable. I think it's more useful to talk about what is most likely.
Not unfalsifiable. Unfalsifiable.
I think you can falsify a God personally, but I was talking about it being more useful to believe, and since we're not talking about that, then more probable to believe.
Do you care if what you believe is true or not?
Yeah, absolutely. I care if what I believe is true.
Yeah, then let's stick to that. The usefulness shouldn't impact whether it's real or not, because you and I could both find it different levels of useful or useless, and that thing is either real or not, regardless of our subjective perspectives of the usefulness of it. So that's why I still want to continue to that's not going to be helpful.
Subjective, Promise?
That usefulness can be subjective, yes, because it depends on what we're basing the concept on. You know, if my goal in life is to eradicate all humanity, then obviously I'm going to see different things as useful or useless. Versus if my goal is to see everybody as happy and healthy and having well-being, we're going to have different levels. So yes, it is subjective.
Getting into another question of definitions again, because when I was imagining useful, I was imagining things that could be used as opposed to things that were specifically used for a purpose. Like I would say a hammer is a very useful tool, even if I don't have any arms and I couldn't necessarily hold it myself. It is still an objectively useful tool.
Right, and I need you to show me that the hammer exists in order to use as a tool.
The reason you believe
and the reason why I was
let's wind ourselves back to
why it was more likely to be real.
Let's wind ourselves back to the testimony. So you're in first century Judea. Sure. You're in first century Judea. Someone walks up to you and says, I saw a risen Jesus. And you think the pie chart is different for that person, that you think it's still more likely, it's somehow more likely that they were accurately assessing an actual genuine miracle versus they're lying or they're mistaken. Am I correct in that's the
I mean, compared to certain other religions, that feels like it's pretty dead to rights.
Why would I care? I think all religions are false.
Yes, absolutely. And I didn't mean to imply that you were religious. I just meant to say that, like, if I was a first century Judean individual, and I was looking at the other competition of other religions that might exist at the time, I would be less inclined to believe in somebody like Zoroaster, as if there was a guy who was literally saying, I am the truth and the way in real life.
I'm asking whether that person who's giving you that testimony is still somehow exempt from being mistaken or lying. What makes that person all of a sudden have a whole different scoring system than every other person in history?
I wouldn't say they have a different scoring system to every person in history, but I would say that the fact that they are in an area where they could potentially verify something of that nature would make them more trustworthy than others who are trying to make them.
This is now I know where I got lost and I'm back to it. So, but now you're adding things to testimony. Now you're saying I'm like not taking that person at their word anymore. Now I'm going and fact checking. So that is no longer accepting based on testimony. That's accepting based on testimony and fact checking. So, but you
I
said you accept
chose
this stuff.
To say that line because I was the first century Judean in the hypothetical.
But fair enough. But that's why I used it as the hypothetical, because then that second century person isn't accepting it based on testimony. They're accepting it in your world based on testimony and fact checking. So there's two things going on.
This is true, but to be sure, you're talking about first-person testimony, like eyewitness testimony, where I'm talking about testimony, which was your nebulous umbrella term that was originally what church tradition was.
I'm just saying that people are wrong and lying in all of these categories. And as far as I can tell, at huge alarming rates that people are wrong and lying. And then there's a sliver. Then you want to carve out, for some reason, a handful of people in the first century who now their likelihood of being wrong and lying are for some reason different than all other humans. And also you're telling me that that's not special pleading.
I'm telling you that it's not special pleading because this is something that can be verified. That was originally my point. Okay.
But then it's not testimony.
Since you gave me a hypothetical, I think it's only fair that I give you one, right?
Hey, Richard, I'm going to slow you down for a second. If you can talk a little bit slower and then give us time to finish our sentences, and then we'll continue to give you plenty of time to talk as we've been doing.
What we're talking about, Richard,
I'm sorry about that. I'm just very nervous.
What we're talking about, Richard, is whether testimony is a good epistemological grounding for a belief. That's all we're talking about here.
You're doing great, Richie.
Right. I'm just trying to make the case specifically that this person's testimony, while not being special pleading, is genuinely more helpful to believe or more likely to believe, like in a probabilistic sense, than other testimonies of equivalent reverence.
Why?
Because at the time, those people would at least have some basis for those claims that was not in supernature.
So then you're telling me that the epistemology of testimony wasn't good enough because they added in fact checking.
Again, I think we're just getting into a definition fight over testimony specifically, because I was using your term of testimony, which was church tradition being inseparable from testimony.
You were telling us that we should believe based on testimony. Right?
Right.
Let me throw a wrench in here real quick, Richard. You're not going to be able to convince me to care about testimony from your religious text or from any other religion's claims that they have. I have my reasons where I need evidence here and now. I need to know why right now I should believe a God exists. We don't even have to get to which one yet. So I'm really curious if you have evidence of that for me, or if you're just saying like these stories and these people said these things and I believe them and I think you should too, in which case I'm just going to have to tell you, sorry, I don't believe you. Let's chat again another time.
Do you believe historical evidence is evidence, Thomas?
My question for you is right now, does a God exist?
I would obviously say yes. And I would say that one of the easiest signifiers of evidence that you and I could verify, because you can check the historicity.
I don't need to check the historicity of gravity. I'm experiencing it right now.
But the evidence was originally found a long time ago. And you can still test the effects of things that happened a long time ago.
Is there any evidence that I can go out and figure out that scientists can go detect right now? Or do we have to take people's word from it from 2,000 years ago?
Well, this will be an entirely different conversation. It seems we've kind of finalized the concept of testimony in church tradition being useful.
I just asked a really clear question, Richard. I'm asking you, is there evidence that exists currently, other than you saying, look at these, claims from 2,000 years ago? Is there evidence right now that a God exists?
Right. I just want to clarify the reason why I said that in the first place. I swear I was just saying that because I wanted to not seem like I was just jumping from argument to argument. In this case, I would say, if we're not talking about the historicity, which was what I first said, then we can talk about things like if you personally believe in special creation or how the world appears designed, appearance of design.
It doesn't appear to be designed to me at all.
That can absolutely be tested. Design doesn't seem clear to you, is what you said?
The universe does not appear to be designed to me. Why does it appear to be designed to you?
I would think that just the fact that Earth harbors life in the first place, as we understand the universe, is so statistically improbable that it implies that there was some cause to it as opposed to it being by chance.
Improbable based off of what? Here we are. Apparently it's not that improbable because we're here.
Improbable based off of every other planet that we can see in the solar system, Promise, or not even solar system, in the universe.
I guess you're not understanding what I'm saying.
Planet,
that, if anything, that gives more validity to what I'm saying, which is that this does seem to be kind of a fluke, and that's really cool, and here we are experiencing it. I don't see any signs of design.
I am just going to reiterate that the fact that we are in what we call a Goldilocks zone, because it's helpful to understand the fact that the Earth happens to be a planet that is hospitable to life, and that we emerged in the first place by itself and by the nature of the fact that we particularly like existing, would be at minimum an argument for God and an evidence for God too.
I don't see that at all. I hear you saying, I think it's rare that we're here and I can't explain it and I need to explain it, so I'm going to say it's a God.
I think you would agree that problems generally demand an explanation.
You can demand it all day long. If we don't know, we don't know.
Right. We can talk about what we know versus don't know. I mean, do you know that you aren't a brain in a vat? Like a Boltzmann brain?
No, I don't know that. That's the whole thing. I don't know if this is a simulation. I don't know if this is part of a multiverse. I don't know. And I'm willing to say that. I'm willing to say we don't know. We don't know if the universe came from anything, if it's always been here in some form. And I have zero reason to think there's an intelligent designer behind it. And I have a lot of reasons to think there isn't, because I can think of like 25 things off the top of my head that seem really unintelligent. And if I was a designer and was all powerful, I would, change a lot of things just about how the human body works.
That you don't know why they are that way doesn't necessarily mean there isn't a logical explanation.
That's not
what we're saying. That's a great sentence. That's not saying that there isn't a logical explanation. There is. That's the whole thing. We can look at our bodies and see how they've evolved to be this way and why things have worked out. But there's no signs of efficiency or intelligence in the idea that my windpipe is right next to where I eat, and people die from eating, which they have to do because this supposed intelligent designer made us to need food and water when he could have made us to not need that at all. Or maybe he could have made us to, I don't know, not have to shit. Like, that would be really cool. If I was trying to be a cool designer, that's one thing I would take out immediately. Also, I would get rid of, to your point, lifeless planets. Why? Not necessary. If you're an all-powerful God, you don't need to do that. If I was going to take the time to make other planets, I'd make them really fucking cool. And I'd make it super easy for us to go to them. There's so many things that we can go on and on and on about. I don't see signs of intelligent design.
That's a very human-centric perspective, wouldn't you agree?
A very different what?
If you're thinking about arguing against a God who is the creator of everything, wouldn't you think that he would kind of be in the corner of everything as opposed to just whatever humans would personally want right now?
Sure, but you're appealing to our sense of things. You're appealing to our sense that there must be an obvious of designer. And the fact
hang on, Paul, I think that's unfair to say, because Promise was literally just appealing to my intuition that there must be something wrong with the human body.
No, but when you make a design argument, you are appealing to intuition.
Correct.
You said things appear.
Sure.
You said things appear designed.
I don't think that's inappropriate.
Promise went on and on
Richard,
to say.
You got to let us finish our sentences.
I'm sorry, you're right.
Promise went on and on to say that for her, and she spoke for me there as well, things don't appear designed. So if you're saying the appearance of design should be evidence for us, we're trying to explain to you that that's not our perspective.
Sure. I guess what I was originally entering the conversation for, so we can capstone it here as far as I'm concerned, I was looking to offer like a dynamic conversation where, fundamentals of reality might be good enough to make an argument. But as I'm learning now, it seems like you guys have this almost ultimate skepticism to any idea that can be hypothetically explained logically.
Why shouldn't we have that skepticism? Why shouldn't we hold out for the most logical conclusion? Why should we jump to magic?
I think that you should jump to the conclusion that best fits with the evidence, which is why I was originally going probabilistically. Why should I jump to a conclusion instead of saying, we don't know? Why should I be so arrogant to, without good reason, other than, well, I don't have another answer, say, I'll go with your answer then, when I don't see any good reason to go with that answer? And as I said, you see a lot of reasons to not go with that answer. Why shouldn't I hold out and just say, I don't know? I think the reason that you shouldn't hold out is because, well, this is just going to go back to all the other reasons that there are reasons to believe that the church is a useful tool for historicity. Like, I think that we have a little bit of stripes on it. We have a little bit of notches on our belt in terms of lasting through criticism.
I understand that you think that you do, but I don't think that. I still don't see any good reason to believe that any gods exist. I don't take your religion any more seriously than I do Islam, which has also lasted a long time and spread really far.
That's true that Islam has lasted a long time. However, Islam has not lasted as long as Christianity.
So if Zoroastrianism is still practiced, then is older than both. So is that the criteria that we should use?
I think that you are simplifying things in a way that are not accurate.
I don't.
I think that you're dodging all of our questions and you're coming back with other questions. And I don't think you're being an honest interlocutor throughout this entire conversation. I appreciate that you're being civil and polite, but I don't feel that you have truly answered some of the things we've come back to you with. And I think that when we've presented you with our very good reasons for not continuing to go off of whatever claim you've made, you go back to something else or you move on to something else. I as you said, you wanted to bookend,
that I was trying to avoid doing that.
That's great that you were trying, I guess. I don't think it worked out that way. We do have to get to other theist callers. I think maybe it sounds like you have somebody else on the line with you coaching you. Maybe you guys go take this conversation and watch it back together. See if you can come up with a better argument. Call Forrest tonight. Forrest and John, they're both great. They're really patient.
Because I was very nervous to meet Paul.
Oh, Richie Letterfield.
Yeah,
fair enough. I'm very scary and intimidating. I get it. Richard, I would love to chat with you again. Richard, I'd love to chat with you again about specifically call in and say that church history is valid history. If that was the conversation you want to have with me sometime, I would love to have that because as you know from watching my stuff, I reject all that, and you must have ideas for why I'm wrong. We can't get into them today, but I would love to have that conversation.
I really appreciate your guys' time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for letting me be here as my friend's emotional support. I genuinely respect your guys' willingness to talk to him about this kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
We didn't know you were on the line, but sure. we'll talk to you again sometime.
Hi.
Richard.
I've been here the whole time.
I figured.
Yeah, we're figuring that out now. All right. Thanks, guys.
Sorry. Thank you.
We have emotional support producers that we have in our ears. So.
We do. We have the voice of God that happens.
Hello, and that was, if I had to say, probably the worst clip I have ever seen on the line. Frankly, that was terrible because they say a lot of facts, but we have alternative facts on our side. Now, do remember that if you are seeing me next to some woman who, frankly, not impressed, but if she were to laugh, that would be an endorsement of me, Donald Trump. A laugh is an endorsement, so do not smile or your face will crack. Don't do it. You can't do it. Okay, I really thought she would break by now, so it's kind of ruining the bit I'm trying to do here. But you can like, you can subscribe. Oh, there it is. She endorsed me.